Think hospitals are for healing and rest. Not in the Middle Ages. Picture a dim stone room packed with strangers moaning through the night. Rats scurrying beneath flea-infested straw, and monks whispering last prayers by candlelight. Privacy, non-existent, sanitation. Forget it. Tonight, we tiptoe into a place where sleep was a rare mercy because survival was never guaranteed. If this glimpse into the grim side of history fascinates you, tap the bell and subscribe. Dust will. Keep uncovering the most quietly horrifying bedtime stories the past has to offer. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? It always amazes me how far these sleepy tales travel. Asterisk, you wake to the sound of bells echoing across the hospital courtyard, their bronze voices cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife through parchment. It's 4 in the morning in the year 1347, and you're lying on a straw mattress in the Hotel Dieu in Paris, sharing your narrow bed with a stranger whose persistent cough has kept you awake for most of the night. The man beside you, a leather worker from the city's tanner's quarter shifts restlessly, his fever-hot skin pressing against yours in the cramped space that the hospital brothers optimistically call a bed. The rhythmic chanting of matins begins in the chapel adjacent to your ward, the Latin words floating through the thin walls like incense. Around you, 30 other patients stir in their shared beds, each movement sending ripples of discomfort through the rope supports that barely hold the weight of 2 grown adults. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, herbal poultices, and something else, something sweet and cloying that you've learned to associate with approaching death. Brother Francois, the night attendant, moves silently between the beds, his sandaled feet making soft whispers against the stone floor. In his weathered hands, he carries a clay vessel filled with holy water, stopping at each bed to sprinkle the occupants while murmuring prayers for their recovery. When he reaches your bed, the cold droplets land on your forehead like tears from heaven. Though you're beginning to suspect that heaven has little interest in the daily miseries unfolding within these walls, the hospital follows the strict routine of monastic life, which means that your day begins not with medical attention or breakfast, but with prayer. Whether you're a devout Christian, a skeptical merchant, or, as rumored about some patients, a Jewish moneylender seeking refuge from the growing tensions in the city, you're expected to participate in the spiritual regimen that governs every aspect of hospital life. The brothers believe that illness stems from spiritual corruption, making prayer as essential as any herbal remedy as the matins bells fade into silence. You hear the shuffle of feet and the rustle of rough woolen habits as the hospital staff begins their morning routine. The Hotel Dieu employs over 100 people to care for its 400 to 500 patients, though care might be a generous description of what actually transpires here. Most of the attendants are lay brothers and sisters who have taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, vows that seem to extend to ignorance about basic medical knowledge. Your bedmate, Natanner, begins another coughing fit, and you notice specks of blood on the rough linen sheet. This should concern you more than it does, but after 3 weeks in this place, you've grown accustomed to the casual proximity of death. Yesterday, the elderly woman in the bed across from yours simply stopped breathing during the midday prayers. The brothers covered her face with a clean cloth, completed their spiritual duties over her body, and by evening, a new patient, young apprentice baker with a festering leg wound, had claimed her spot. The hospital's daily schedule follows the canonical hours, those ancient divisions of time that regulate monastic life: matins at 4, lauds at dawn, prime at 6, terce at 9, sext at noon, nones at 3, vespers at sunset, and compline before sleep. Between these prayer sessions, the basic necessities of hospital life unfold with mechanical precision. After lauds, the patients who can walk will shuffle to the communal latrine, a long wooden bench with circular holes that empty into a channel running beneath the building. Those too weak to leave their beds rely on chamber pots that are emptied, with varying degrees of frequency, depending on the diligence of the attending staff. The first meal of the day arrives after prime, carried in by lay sisters whose faces remain hidden beneath deep hoods. The food is surprisingly substantial. Thick pottage made from barley and whatever vegetables survived the winter in the hospital's garden, accompanied by dark bread that's only slightly stale and a portion of cheese that's been aged in the hospital's cellars. The daily rations also include ale, about 2 pints per person, because the brothers understand that water from the Seine is more likely to kill you than cure you. You eat with a wooden spoon from a shared bowl, your bedmates trembling, hands making it difficult for either of you to manage a proper meal. The food itself is nourishing enough, prepared according to the humoral theory that governs all medical practice. Your fever marks you as having excess blood and yellow bile, so your portions are designed to cool and dry your constitution. No warming spices, no red meat. Nothing that might inflame your already overheated system around you. The ward comes alive with the quiet conversations of patients sharing their ailments and fears. The man in the corner bed arrived last week with what the brothers call the falling sickness, what modern medicine would recognize as epilepsy. His fits terrify the other patients, but the hospital staff treats them with a mixture of prayer and restraint, holding him down during seizures and afterward feeding him blessed water mixed with powdered unicorn horn. At least, what the hospital's apothecary claims is unicorn horn. The morning medical rounds begin after terce, announced by the arrival of Master Henry, the hospital's physician. He's a thin man with ink-stained fingers who studied at the University of Paris and carries himself with the confidence of someone who has read every important medical text from ancient Greece to contemporary Montpellier. Its examination technique consists primarily of studying patients' urine in glass flasks held up to the light, looking for color, clarity, and sediment that might reveal the body's humoral balance. When Master Henry reaches your bed, he barely glances at you or your coughing bedmate. Instead, he examines the contents of your chamber pot with scholarly intensity, swirling the liquid and even bringing it close enough to smell. After a moment of contemplation, he announces that your fever indicates an excess of blood and prescribes bloodletting to restore your natural equilibrium. The tanner's bloody cough earns him a diagnosis of corrupted phlegm and a prescription for purgatives that will, theoretically, evacuate the offending humor through violent diarrhea. These pronouncements are delivered with such authority that questioning them would border on heresy. Master Henry represents not just medical knowledge, a divine order, the belief that God created a perfect system for understanding and treating disease. That this system seems to cure remarkably few people is beside the point. Faith in the established order requires accepting that failure to recover indicates spiritual rather than medical inadequacy. The hospital's architecture reflects this integration of spiritual and physical healing. Your bed sits in a long hall with high windows that allow natural light to stream across the ward. The design deliberately places patients where they can see and hear the daily religious services, ensuring that even the bedridden participate in the community's spiritual life. The walls are decorated with painted scenes from the lives of saints, particularly those known for healing miracles, and a large crucifix dominates the space above the altar. Yet for all its spiritual ambitions, the hospital struggles with the most basic aspects of patient care. The shared beds mean that healthy patients often leave sicker than when they arrived, having spent weeks breathing the same air and sharing intimate contact with those suffering from various ailments. The hospital's rule requires that patients of different genders be separated, but no such consideration is given to separating those with different types of illness. By midday, the heat of summer makes the ward nearly unbearable. The high windows that seem so generous in winter become furnaces that concentrate the sun's energy into the overcrowded space. The smell of unwashed bodies mingles with the scent of herbs and incense, creating an atmosphere so thick it seems almost solid. Several patients have developed what the brothers call hospital fever, a condition that seems to afflict people only after they've spent several weeks in the institution. As the sun reaches its zenith and the bells announce sext, you realize that your morning has been entirely consumed by the hospital's rhythm of prayer, meals, and medical examinations that accomplish nothing. The afternoon stretches ahead with the promise of more of the same: more prayers, more shared meals, more consultations that result in treatments that make you feel worse rather than better. Your bedmate has fallen into a restless sleep, his breathing shallow and rapid. The bloody foam at the corners of his mouth has increased throughout the morning, and you've noticed that the brothers no longer bother to include him in their medical discussions. In a few days, perhaps a week, you'll wake to find his half of the bed occupied by someone new. Someone who hasn't yet learned that entry into this place dedicated to healing might very well be the first step toward an early grave. The question that haunts your afternoon contemplation is simple enough. In a world where hospitals are supposed to represent humanity's highest ideals of charity and compassion, why does it feel like you're waiting in an antechamber to eternity, where the only certainty is that tomorrow will bring more of the same, uncomfortable, ineffective, and ultimately futile routine? The afternoon heat transforms the hospital ward into something resembling a vision of purgatory. As the bells announce nones, the 3 o'clock prayer service, you've begun to understand that the Hotel Dieu operates less like a place of healing and more like a spiritual processing center where the poor come to die in marginally better circumstances than they might manage on the streets of Paris. Your bedmate, the tanner, has grown increasingly delirious as the day progresses. His fever has reached the point where his skin feels like heated metal against yours, and his rambling conversations with invisible companions from his past have become a constant background to your own discomfort. The brothers treat his condition with a mixture of spiritual remedies and what they generously call medical intervention. They've placed a small cloth bag filled with blessed herbs around his neck, sprinkled holy water on his burning forehead at regular intervals, and administered a purgative that has left him even weaker than before. The hospital's approach to patient care reveals itself most clearly in these afternoon hours, when the initial morning activities have concluded and the long wait until evening prayers stretches ahead like an eternity. The 100 staff members who serve the hotelier are organized into a strict hierarchy that prioritizes spiritual duties over practical medical care. At the top stands the master or administrator, who took an oath to the Bishop of Paris and manages the hospital's considerable property and income from donations. Below him, a complex network of brothers, sisters, clerks, and servants maintains the daily operations that keep several hundred patients fed, housed, and spiritually tended. The lay brothers who attend to your ward are genuine in their dedication, but their training consists primarily of religious instruction, supplemented by folk remedies passed down through generations of hospital service. Brother Francois, who woke you this morning with holy water, learned his medical knowledge from Brother Auguste, who learned it from Brother Michel, who learned it from someone whose name has been forgotten but whose questionable practices live on in institutional memory. When a new patient arrives in the afternoon, young woman with a swollen belly that might indicate pregnancy or might signal internal corruption, you witness the hospital's admission. Ceremony firsthand, the process begins not with medical examination, but with spiritual cleansing. The woman's feet are washed in a basin of water mixed with herbs. Her travel-stained clothes are removed and replaced with a clean linen gown that marks her transformation from independent person to hospital patient. The ceremony continues with confession, administered by one of the hospital's chaplains in a small side chapel adjacent to the main ward. This spiritual preparation is considered essential because the brothers believe that physical illness stems from spiritual corruptions, sin made manifest in the flesh. only after her soul has been cleansed through confession and absolution, is the woman assigned to a bed in the women's ward, where she shares sleeping space with another patient whose ailments may or may not be compatible with recovery. The hospital's record keeping is meticulous in some areas and completely absent in others. Every donation is carefully documented, every expenditure recorded, every piece of property inventoried with scholarly precision. But medical records information about diagnoses, treatments, or outcomes exist only in the memory of individual staff members. When Master Henry prescribes bloodletting for a fever or purgatives for corrupted humors, no one tracks whether these treatments actually improve patients' conditions. This absence of systematic medical documentation means that the hospital operates in a perpetual present tense, where each patient's symptoms are treated as isolated phenomena rather than part of ongoing conditions that might respond to consistent care. Your Tanner bedmate has been coughing blood for 3 weeks, but no one has considered whether his treatment might be adjusted based on the failure of previous interventions. The economic reality underlying the hospital's operations becomes apparent during the afternoon administrative activities. The Hôtel Dieu owns substantial properties throughout Paris and the surrounding countryside, generating rental income that supports its charitable mission. Wealthy benefactors make regular donations, sometimes in the form of money, but often as livestock, grain, wine, or other goods that must be processed and distributed. The hospital operates its own bakeries, breweries, and kitchens to feed its residents, and maintains gardens that provide both food and medicinal herbs. Yet despite these resources, the institution constantly struggles with overcrowding. The hospital's 300 beds are designed to accommodate 600 patients through the practice of bed sharing, but actual occupancy often exceeds even this doubled capacity. During particularly harsh winters or periods of epidemic disease, patients sleep on straw mats placed on the floor between the regular beds, creating conditions that would challenge even the most robust constitution. The afternoon meal arrives, as the shadows begin to lengthen across the ward. The food is remarkably similar to the morning meal-thick pottage: bread, cheese, and ale, because the hospital's kitchen operates on the principle that consistency is more important than variety. The brothers believe that dietary change might disrupt patients' humoral balance, potentially interfering with whatever healing God has planned for their conditions. As you share another meal with your increasingly delirious bedmate, you observe the social dynamics that govern hospital life. Patients form temporary alliances based on shared suffering, exchanging information about treatments, sharing food when someone is too weak to eat their full portion, and providing comfort during the long, uncomfortable nights. These relationships develop quickly and dissolve just as rapidly when death or recovery removes someone from the community. The woman who arrived this afternoon has been placed in a bed near the window, sharing space with an elderly seamstress, who claims to have been in the hospital for nearly 6 months. The seamstress explains the hospital's unwritten rules, how to attract the attention of the staff when you need assistance, which brothers are most sympathetic to requests for extra blankets or better food, and which patients to avoid because their conditions seem particularly contagious. The hospital's approach to medical treatment reveals itself most clearly in the late afternoon, when Master Henry makes his second daily rounds. His examinations remain limited to visual inspection and urine analysis, supplemented by questions about patient's spiritual state. Has the patient been praying regularly? Has he confessed his sins completely? Has she been maintaining the proper humility in the face of divine judgment? These questions aren't purely spiritual. The brothers genuinely believe that moral failings contribute to physical illness, making spiritual assessment an essential component of medical diagnosis. A patient who seems insufficiently penitent might be prescribed additional prayers along with herbal remedies, while someone who demonstrates proper humility might receive more charitable attention. during mealtimes or evening care. The hospitals. Pharmacy, located in a small chamber off the main ward, contains an impressive collection of substances that reflect both scholarly medical knowledge and popular folk wisdom. Shelves hold jars of ground pearls, powdered unicorn horn, preserved dragon's blood, and various metals that are supposed to restore humoral balance when consumed in carefully measured doses. More practical remedies include willow bark for fever, chamomile for digestive complaints, and various herbs that actually provide some therapeutic benefit. Yet the hospital's pharmaceutical approach suffers from the same lack of systematic observation that characterizes all its medical practices. Remedies are prescribed based on theoretical principles rather than observed results. And the same treatments are applied regardless of whether previous patients with similar symptoms showed any improvement as Vespers approaches and the long summer afternoon finally begins to cool. You realize that the hospital's daily routine serves primarily to organize time rather than to promote healing. The succession of prayer services, meals, medical consultations, and administrative activities creates a framework that makes institutional life manageable. But this framework operates largely independent of patients' actual medical needs. Your bedmate has fallen into a deep sleep that might be recovery or might be the final surrender to whatever illness has brought him here. The afternoon has passed without any meaningful change in his condition. Despite the ministrations of brothers, the examination by Master Henry, and the various remedies applied throughout the day, the fundamental question that emerges from this afternoon of observation is whether the hospital actually makes sick people better, or whether it simply provides a framework for dying in company rather than alone. The institution clearly serves important social functions, caring for people who have no other resources, maintaining charitable traditions that reflect Christian values, and providing a place where suffering can be witnessed and shared rather than hidden. But as evening approaches and you prepare for another night of sharing clothes, quarters with a man whose condition seems to worsen with each passing hour, you begin to wonder whether the hospital's greatest service might be its ability to transform the random chaos of illness into something that resembles an ordered, meaningful process. If that process leads, more often than not, toward the same destination that awaited patients before they arrived. The evening meal arrives as the bells announce Vespers, and the hospital ward settles into the peculiar rhythm that governs life after sunset. Your bedmate, the tanner, has passed into a state that hovers between sleep and something more permanent. His breathing has become irregular, punctuated by long pauses that leave you holding your own breath until his chest rises again with a rattling intake of air. The brothers have begun to pay him the kind of attention reserved for patients who are preparing to meet their Maker. Brother Francois approaches your bed, carrying a small wooden crucifix and a vial of holy oil. He doesn't need to explain his purpose. After 3 weeks in this place, you've witnessed this scene enacted dozens of times. The last rites administered in medieval hospitals aren't simply religious ceremonies, they're practical acknowledgments that the institution's medical capabilities have reached their limit. The tanner, despite his delirium, seems to understand what's happening. He attempts to cross himself, though his trembling hands can barely complete the gesture. Brother Francois anoints his forehead with oil while murmuring the familiar Latin prayers that accompany the dying. Around the ward, other patients fall silent out of respect, though you notice that several are watching with the intense attention of people who know they might be next. The hospital's approach to death reflects its broader philosophy about the relationship between physical and spiritual healing. In the brothers' understanding, death isn't necessarily a failure of medical treatment. It might represent the successful completion of spiritual preparation for the afterlife. A patient who dies in a state of grace, having received the sacraments and spent his final days in prayer and contemplation, has achieved something more valuable than physical recovery. This perspective provides comfort for both patients and staff. but it also reveals the limitations of medieval medical practice. The hospital can offer spiritual consolation, basic nursing care, adequate nutrition, and shelter from the elements. What it cannot provide is effective treatment for most of the conditions that bring people through its doors. Fevers run there. Coarse wounds either heal or become infected, and chronic conditions gradually worsen despite the application of traditional remedies. As darkness settles over Paris, the ward takes on a different character. Oil lamps provide flickering illumination that creates pools of light separated by deep shadows. The night routine begins with Compline, the final prayer service of the day, followed by the gradual settling of several hundred patients into whatever rest their conditions and shared sleeping arrangements allow. The hospital's night staff consists of fewer attendants than during the day, which means that patients must rely more heavily on each other for assistance. The elderly seamstress in the next bed has taken it upon herself to help the newly arrived woman adjust to hospital life, explaining the unwritten rules that govern after-dark behavior. Patients are expected to remain quietly in their beds unless they need to use the communal latrine or require urgent medical attention. The shared sleeping arrangements that seemed merely uncomfortable during daylight hours become almost unbearable. At night, your Tanner bedmate's fever makes him radiate heat like a small furnace, while his irregular breathing and occasional delirium create constant disturbance. The rope bed frame creaks with every movement, and the straw mattress has developed permanent depressions that make comfortable positioning nearly impossible. Around you, the ward fills with the sounds of several hundred people trying to sleep in inadequate conditions. Someone in the corner coughs repeatedly, a harsh sound that suggests lungs damaged by years of breathing the smoky air of medieval Paris. A woman in the next row weeps quietly, perhaps mourning her own condition, or grieving for family members she may never see again. The man across the aisle talks to himself in a language you don't recognize, possibly prayers in Hebrew or Arabic, evidence of the hospital's policy of admitting patients, regardless of their religious background. The hospital's reputation for accepting anyone who needs care extends beyond religious tolerance to include people from all social classes and occupations. Your Tanner bedmate represents the skilled artisan class, but the ward also houses day laborers, merchants, students, pilgrims, and even occasional members of the minor nobility who have fallen on hard times. This democratic mixing of social classes creates an unusual community where traditional hierarchies matter less than shared suffering. Yet even in this equalizing environment, certain distinctions persist. Patients who arrive with some financial resources can arrange for better food, additional blankets, or private consultations with physicians beyond the hospital's regular staff. The woman who arrived this afternoon mentioned that her family had paid a small fee to ensure she would receive extra attention during her confinement. Though what form that attention takes remains unclear. The night hours also reveal the hospital's vulnerability to problems that don't appear on any administrative roster. The building is old, and its stone construction provides little protection against winter cold or summer heat. Rats are common enough that patients have learned to secure their few possessions in ways that discourage nocturnal theft by rodents. The communal latrines become increasingly unpleasant as the night progresses, creating sanitation challenges that affect everyone's comfort and health more seriously. The hospital's overcrowded conditions facilitate the spread of diseases that the patients might not have contracted if they had remained in their own homes. The practice of bed sharing means that respiratory ailments pass easily from person to person, while the communal meals and shared facilities create opportunities for intestinal conditions to spread throughout the ward. Around midnight, your Tanner bedmate's condition takes a decisive turn. His breathing becomes even more labored, and he begins making sounds that suggest his body is struggling to maintain basic functions. Brother Francois returns with additional attendants and a chaplain. and they arrange themselves around your bed in a configuration you've seen before. The medieval hospital's approach to managing death is both practical and ceremonial. The staff members who gather around dying patients aren't there primarily to provide medical intervention. They're present to ensure that death occurs within the proper spiritual framework. They hold candles, recite prayers, and maintain a vigil that continues until the patient's breathing finally stops. When your bedmate dies shortly before dawn, the process unfolds with efficient familiarity. The brothers cover his face with a clean cloth, arrange his hands in prayer position, and begin the prayers for the dead that will continue until his body is removed for burial. You're moved temporarily to a straw mattress on the floor while they prepare the bed for the next patient, who will likely arrive before the morning meal is served. The death occurs during the period between compline and matins, in those quiet hours when the hospital operates with minimal staff and maximum vulnerability. Other patients doze fitfully or lie awake listening to the sounds of institutional life continuing around them. The presence of death in the ward isn't treated as a medical emergency or a cause for alarm, simply another event in the hospitals. Daily routine, as predictable as meals or prayer services. As the bells announce matins and another day begins, you realize that your Tanner bedmate's death has taught you something important about medieval hospitals. They're not designed to cure disease so much as to provide a framework within which illness and death can be managed according to Christian principles. The hospital offers dignity, community, spiritual preparation for whatever outcome God has ordained. Whether this represents adequate healthcare depends entirely on your expectations. If you hope for medical intervention that might actually improve your condition, the hospital will disappoint you. If you want a place where suffering can be shared, where basic needs are met, and where death can occur with appropriate ceremony, then the institution fulfills its purpose. The fundamental question that emerges from spending a night in close proximity to death isn't whether medieval hospitals save lives. They clearly save some while failing to save others. The question is whether the comfort, dignity, and spiritual preparation they provide justify the risks and discomforts that patients endure while residing within their walls. For people with no other options, perhaps that's enough. For those who still harbor hopes of actual recovery, the long night's journey through medieval hospital care might feel more like a preliminary stage of dying than a meaningful step toward healing. You awaken at dawn to the sight of Master Henry standing over your new bed, holding a glass flask filled with your urine up to the pale morning light filtering through the hospital's high windows. His examination of your bodily fluids has become the cornerstone of medieval medical diagnosis, a practice so revered that questioning it would be tantamount to challenging the divine order itself. The urine analysis that determines your morning treatment relies on a complex system of color interpretation that traces its origins to ancient Greek physicians and has been refined through centuries of scholarly debate. Master Henry swirls your urine with the practiced motion of someone tasting wine, observing the way the liquid moves, noting its clarity, examining the sediment that has settled overnight. The flask itself is a marvel of medieval craftsmanship, blown from clear glass that allows for precise observation of the sample's characteristics. According to the humoral theory that governs all medical practice, your urine reveals the balance of 4 essential humors within your body: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The morning's diagnosis unfolds like a religious ceremony. Master Henry announces that your urine displays characteristics consistent with excess blood. It's too red, too thick, and contains sediment that suggests your sanguine humor has overwhelmed the others. This explains your fever, your restless nights, and your general sense of malaise. The treatment is obvious to anyone trained in proper medical principles. Bloodletting must restore your body's natural equilibrium. The bloodletting procedure scheduled for your morning treatment represents the pinnacle of medieval medical technology. Brother Augustine, the hospital's designated phlebotomist, arrives with a leather case containing the tools of his trade: bronze lancets sharpened to surgical precision, glass cups for collecting blood, and linen bandages for managing the aftermath. His technique has been passed down through generations of medical practitioners, each refinement designed to maximize the procedure's effectiveness while minimizing unnecessary discomfort. The theoretical foundation underlying bloodletting stretches back to classical antiquity. When Greek physicians first proposed that human health depended on maintaining proper balance between the bodies for humors, blood associated with the element of air and the qualities of heat and moisture, naturally tends toward excess in young, vigorous patients. Yellow bile linked to fire and characterized by heat and dryness can cause fever and agitation when present in disproportionate quantities. Phlegm, connected to water and marked by coldness and moisture, produces lethargy and respiratory problems when it accumulates beyond normal levels. Black bile, tied to earth and defined by coldness and dryness, creates melancholy and digestive disorders when it dominates the humoral system. Master Henry's examination reveals that your constitution tends naturally toward sanguine characteristic, pure, optimistic, energetic, and prone to fevers that suggest excess blood. The current illness has exaggerated these tendencies, creating a dangerous imbalance that requires immediate correction. The bloodletting treatment will remove approximately 8 ounces of blood from a vein in your left arm, reducing the sanguine humor's dominance and allowing the other humors to reassert their proper influence. Brother Augustine begins the procedure by examining your arm, looking for a vein that will provide adequate blood flow without risking excessive loss. The medieval understanding of circulatory anatomy is remarkably sophisticated in some areas and completely wrong in others. The brothers know that blood moves through vessels that connect various parts of the body, but they believe that different veins contain different types of blood suited for specific medical purposes. The lancet's insertion creates a sharp, brief pain followed by the steady flow of dark red blood into the collection cup. Brother Augustine monitors the procedure with practiced attention, observing the blood's color, consistency, and flow rate for signs that might require adjusting the treatment. The blood itself provides diagnostic information. Bright red indicates healthy sanguine humor, while dark or thick blood suggests corruption that justifies more aggressive intervention. As your blood fills the cup, you experience the peculiar sensation that medieval patients describe as the gradual restoration of PHA, of humoral balance. The fever that has troubled you for days begins to subside, not because the bloodletting addresses the underlying infection, but because the procedure triggers physiological responses that temporarily affect your symptoms. The reduced blood volume lowers your blood pressure, which can indeed provide some relief from fever-related discomfort. The hospital's medical library, housed in a small chamber adjacent to Master Henry's consulting room, contains the texts that justify these treatments, manuscripts copied from Arabic translations of Greek originals, supplemented by commentaries from medieval scholars who have spent lifetimes refining the ancient wisdom. The books themselves are beautiful objects, written on parchment with illuminated letters that transform medical knowledge into works of art. Yet the disconnect between theoretical sophistication and practical results becomes apparent as you observe other patients undergoing similar treatments. The elderly seamstress in the next bed has been subjected to bloodletting 3 times in the past week, each procedure designed to address her persistent cough and shortness of breath. Rather than improving, she's grown progressively weaker, though the medical staff attributes her decline to the stubborn nature of her humoral imbalance rather than to the treatments themselves. The hospital's pharmacy provides another window into medieval medical practice. Brother Thomas, the herbalist, maintains an impressive collection of substances designed to complement bloodletting by addressing specific humoral disorders. His shelves contain medicinal herbs grown in the hospital's garden, chamomile for digestive complaints, willow bark for fever, lavender for nervous disorders, and dozens of other plants whose properties have been cataloged through centuries of systematic observation. More exotic remedies reflect the medieval fascination with rare and expensive substances. Powdered pearls are prescribed for patients whose conditions suggest they need cooling and drying treatments. Ground unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, imported at enormous expense from northern seas prove, made the ultimate remedy for poison and corruption. Dragon's blood, a red resin from tropical trees, offers powerful heating and drying properties for patients suffering from excess phlegm. The theoretical elegance of humoral medicine becomes apparent as Master Henry explains the reasoning behind your treatment. Your sanguine constitution, evident in your natural optimism and tendency to ward fever, has been exacerbated by environmental factors including the summer heat, your diet before entering the hospital, and possibly your emotional state when the illness began. The bloodletting addresses the immediate excess of sanguine humor, while dietary modifications will prevent future imbalances. Your post-bloodletting diet reflects careful consideration of humoral principles. Since you've been diagnosed with excess blood and yellow bile, your meals will emphasize foods with cooling and drying properties. Fish rather than red meat, barley instead of wheat. Vegetables that grow in cool, moist conditions rather than those that prefer heat and dryness. Even your ale will be selected for its humoral characteristics, avoiding varieties that might inflame your already overheated constitution. The hospital's approach to surgical procedures reveals medieval medicine's complex relationship with practical intervention. While bloodletting is routine and relatively safe, more invasive procedures carry risks that make them treatments of last resort. Master Henry can describe surgical techniques for treating wounds, removing bladder stones, and even performing cataract operations. But these procedures are attempted only when conservative. Treatments have clearly failed. The morning's medical activities conclude with Master Henry recording your treatment in his personal notes, not the hospital's official records, which focus on administrative rather than medical matters. His observations will inform future treatments, though the absence of systematic follow-up means that the effectiveness of different approaches is never formally evaluated. As the bloodletting session ends and Brother Augustine bandages your arm, you're struck by the contrast between the medical staff's confidence and the uncertain outcomes of their treatments. The humoral theory provides a comprehensive framework for understanding disease and designing interventions. The framework operates largely independent of observed results. The fundamental question raised by medieval medical practice isn't whether the treatments work. Some clearly provide temporary relief, while others seem to make patients worse. The question is whether a sophisticated theoretical system that occasionally helps people by accident represents genuine medical knowledge or elaborate legislation for procedures that feel like they should be effective. The afternoon stretches ahead with the promise of dietary modifications, herbal remedies, and continued observation of your humoral balance. Whether these interventions will actually improve your condition remains as uncertain as it was before Master Henry arrived with his glass flask and his centuries. All certainties about the nature of human disease. The afternoon medical rounds at the hospital reveal the full complexity of medieval pharmaceutical practice. As Brother Thomas arrives with a wooden tray containing the herbal remedies prescribed to complement your morning bloodletting, the hospital's pharmacy operates as both apothecary shop and alchemical laboratory, where centuries-old recipes are compounded with ingredients ranging from common garden herbs to exotic substances imported from the edges of the known world. Your prescribed remedies reflect Master Henry's diagnosis of humoral imbalance. Specifically, the excess of sanguine and choleric humors indicated by your fever and restless temperament. The first preparation is a tisane made from willow bark, chamomile, and lavender herbs selected for their cooling and calming properties. Brother Thomas explains that the willow bark will reduce the heat associated with excess blood, while the chamomile addresses the digestive disturbances caused by yellow bile, and the lavender will soothe your overwrought nerves. The preparation of medieval medicines follows procedures that combine practical herbcraft with ritualistic elements, designed to enhance the remedy's spiritual efficacy. Brother Thomas blessed the herbs while picking them during the proper lunar phase, ground them using a mortar and pestle that had been consecrated for medicinal use, and mixed the preparations while reciting prayers that invoke divine assistance. In the healing process, the hospital's herb garden, visible through the ward's windows, represents a living pharmacy where medicinal plants grow in carefully planned arrangements that reflect both practical considerations and symbolic meanings. Rows of chamomile flourish in the sunny sections, while shade-loving herbs, like comfrey and plantain, occupy spaces beneath the garden's few trees. Each plant has been selected not only for its therapeutic properties, but also for its place in the complex system of correspondences that medieval medicine uses to understand the relationship between earthly substances and cosmic forces. Master, Henry returns in the afternoon with a more exotic remedy, a small vial containing liquid that he describes as aqua vita, the water of life produced through distillation techniques that represent the cutting edge of medieval chemistry. The clear, potent liquid burns your throat when you drink it, producing a warming sensation that supposedly counteracts the cooling effects of excessive phlegm, while simultaneously purifying your blood of corruptions that ordinary remedies cannot address. The distillation apparatus used to create aqua vita occupies a special chamber in the hospital's basement, where Brother Albertus tends to alchemical procedures that blur the line between medicine and magic. His equipment includes copper alembics, glass retorts, and furnaces that can maintain the steady heat necessary for extracting the essential properties from various substances. The process itself requires weeks of careful attention, as raw materials undergo repeated heating, cooling, and refinement until they yield products that concentrate their most potent characteristics. The theoretical foundation underlying these pharmaceutical practices draws from Arabic texts that translated and expanded upon ancient Greek knowledge. The hospital's medical library contains Latin copies of works by Avicenna and Rhazes, Islamic physicians whose systematic approach to medicine influenced European practice for centuries. These texts provide detailed instructions for preparing hundreds of different remedies, each designed to address specific combinations of humoral imbalances. Yet the gulf between theoretical sophistication and practical results becomes apparent as you observe the effects of your prescribed treatments. The willow bark tisane does provide some relief from your fever, though whether this improvement comes from the herb's anti-inflammatory properties or from the cooling effect of drinking any liquid remains unclear. The aqua vita produces a temporary sense of well-being that might indicate genuine therapeutic benefit or might simply reflect alcohol's general effects on mood and perception. The elderly seamstress in the adjacent bed has been prescribed a different set of remedies designed to address her persistent cough and progressive weakness. Her treatments include a syrup made from honey, hyssop, and ground pearls, intended to soothe her respiratory tract while providing the cooling influence needed to balance her overheated constitution. She's also been given small doses of powdered bezoara, substance formed in the stomachs of certain animals and prized for its ability to neutralize poisons and purify corrupted humors. The hospital's approach to pharmaceutical compounding reveals medieval medicine's fascinating combination of empirical observation and speculative theorizing. Brother Thomas has genuinely observed that willow bark relieves fever and that chamomile soothes digestive complaints, discoveries that reflect careful attention to the effects of natural substances. But he interprets these observations through the lens of humoral theory, imputing the herb's effectiveness to their supposed ability to cool and dry overheated, overly moist constitutions. More problematic are the expensive exotic remedies whose reputations rest more on their rarity than unobserved therapeutic effects. The powdered unicorn horn prescribed for certain patients costs more than most people earn in a month, yet its supposed benefit, neutralizing poison, purifying blood, and strengthening the heart, remain largely theoretical. The substance itself may be genuine narwhal tusk, but its medical properties exist primarily in the elaborate theoretical system that medieval physicians used to justify their treatments. The hospital's surgical procedures represent another aspect of medieval medical practice that combines genuine skill with theoretical limitations. Master Henry can perform bloodletting with remarkable precision, using techniques that minimize infection risk and ensure adequate blood loss without endangering the patient's life. He can also treat wounds, set broken bones, and perform simple operations like removing bladder stones or treating cataracts. But surgical interventions remain dangerous in an era before anesthesia, antisepsis, or detailed understanding of anatomy. The hospital's success rate for major operations hovers around 50%, which represents remarkable achievement given the limitations of medieval surgical knowledge, but also means that half the patients who undergo invasive procedures die from complications that might be preventable with better understanding of physiology and infection control. The afternoon's pharmaceutical activities conclude with Master Henry's examination of your response to the morning's treatments. He checks your pulse, observes your complexion, and examines your urine again to assess whether the bloodletting and herbal remedies have begun to restore humoral balance. His diagnostic techniques rely heavily on visual observation supplemented by basic palpation, though his interpretations of what he observes remain filtered through theoretical assumptions that may or may not correspond to physiological reality. The process reveals medieval medicine's greatest strength and most significant weakness. Its practitioners are genuinely committed to systematic observation and logical reasoning, but their theoretical framework for interpreting observations often leads them away from rather than toward effective treatments. Master Henry carefully notes that your fever has decreased and your sleep improved, which he attributes to the successful reduction of excess sanguine humor through bloodletting and the cooling effects of herbal remedies, yet alternative explanations. For your improvement trust, adequate nutrition, the natural course of viral infection, or simple regression to the mean ever enter his consideration. The humoral theory provides such a comprehensive framework for understanding disease that contradictory evidence can always be explained away as indicating the need for different treatments rather than questioning the fundamental assumptions underlying medical practice. As evening approaches and the hospital prepares for the night's routines, you've experienced a representative sample of medieval medical care at its most sophisticated level. The treatments you've received reflect centuries of accumulated knowledge, expensive imported substances, and theoretical frameworks that attempt to provide rational explanations for the relationship between disease and therapy. Whether these treatments will actually cure your condition remains an open question. Some patients clearly benefit from the hospital's care, while others decline despite receiving identical treatments. The medieval medical establishment attributes these different outcomes to variations in patients' constitutions, the stubborn nature of certain diseases, or divine intervention that transcends human understanding. The more troubling possibility that medieval medicine's elaborate theoretical systems might be fundamentally wrong rarely receives serious consideration. The investment in humoral theory, both intellectual and economic, has become too great to abandon without overwhelming evidence that alternative approaches work better. And in a world where most diseases resolve spontaneously or prove fatal regardless of treatment, it's difficult to accumulate the kind of systematic evidence that might challenge established medical orthodoxy. The question that emerges from an afternoon of medieval pharmaceutical practice isn't whether the treatments provide some benefit. They occasionally do. The question is whether the benefits justify the costs, risks, and false confidence that accompany reliance on elaborate theoretical systems that may have little connection to biological reality. Evening rounds at the hospital bring Master Henry's most challenging cases, those patients whose conditions have resisted standard treatments and require the full application of medieval medical knowledge. As the sun sets and oil lamps cast flickering shadows across the ward, you witness the theoretical elegance and practical limitations of a medical system that has dominated European healthcare for centuries. The first patient Master Henry examines is a young priest from a rural parish who arrived 3 days ago with symptoms that defy easy classification within the humoral framework. His fever alternates with periods of chills, his appetite fluctuates wildly, and his urine displays characteristics that suggest multiple contradictory imbalances. The case requires Master Henry to demonstrate the sophisticated diagnostic reasoning that distinguishes university-trained physicians from simple herbalists. The priest's condition, Master Henry explains to the assembled brothers, represents what medieval medical texts call a complex fever, a disorder involving multiple humoral imbalances that create competing symptoms requiring careful therapeutic balance. The patient's morning urine suggests excess yellow bile, indicated by its dark color and bitter smell. But his afternoon samples display characteristics consistent with corrupted phlegm, while his evening urine shows signs of melancholic corruption that typically develops in patients with excess black bile. Master Henry's diagnostic process involves not only physical examination, but also detailed questioning about the patient's lifestyle, diet, emotional state, and spiritual condition in the weeks preceding his illness. Medieval medical theory holds that disease results from the complex interaction between constitutional tendencies, environmental influences, and moral factors, making comprehensive case history essential for proper treatment. The priest admits to several potential contributing factors. He had been fasting excessively in preparation for a religious festival, had experienced considerable anxiety about delivering a difficult sermon, and had been exposed to corrupted air while visiting parishioners during a recent epidemic of fever. Each of these elements provides clues about how his natural humoral balance became disrupted, though determining the relative importance of different factors requires the kind of scholarly analysis that represents medieval medicine at its most sophisticated. The treatment protocol Master Henry designs for the priest illustrates the complex reasoning that governs advanced medieval medical practice. Since the patient's symptoms suggest multiple competing imbalances, therapy must address each disorder without exacerbating the others. Bloodletting would normally reduce fever associated with excess yellow bile, but the priest's apparent melancholic tendencies might be worsened by procedures that further cool his constitution. Instead, Master Henry prescribes a carefully balanced regimen that includes moderate bloodletting from a specific vein believed to drain corrupted humors without depleting healthy blood, herbal remedies that provide warming and cooling influences in precise proportion, and dietary modifications designed to supply the nutrients needed to restore proper humoral balance. The priest will also receive spiritual counseling to address the emotional disturbances that may have contributed to his physical condition. The hospital's approach to complex cases reveals both the strengths and weaknesses of medieval medical reasoning. Master Henry's analysis demonstrates genuine intellectual rigor, careful observation, and systematic attempt to understand the relationship between symptoms and underlying pathology. His theoretical framework provides guidance for designing treatments that address multiple symptoms while maintaining internal logical consistency. Yet the elaborate reasoning process operates largely independent of empirical validation. Medieval medicine lacks systematic methods for testing whether its theoretical predictions actually correspond to patient outcomes. Individual physicians may notice that certain treatments seem more effective than others, But this observational evidence rarely gets integrated into formal medical knowledge in ways that might challenge established theoretical foundations. The second complex case involves a middle-aged merchant whose condition has puzzled the hospital staff for over 2 weeks. His symptoms include joint pain that moves from limb to limb, skin lesions that appear and disappear unpredictably, and periodic episodes of delirium that suggest corruption of the brain's normal function. Master Henry's examination reveals additional complications. The patient's pulse varies dramatically throughout the day. His urine changes color and consistency from hour to hour, and his response to standard treatments has been inconsistent. Medieval medical theory provides several possible explanations for such complex symptom patterns. The condition might result from corrupted air that has introduced foreign humors into the patient's system, creating imbalances that shift as the body attempts to expel the contaminating influences. Alternatively, the merchant's lifestyle, extensive travel, irregular meals, exposure to various climates might have gradually disrupted his natural constitution until multiple organs began malfunctioning simultaneously. The diagnostic challenge posed by such cases pushes medieval medicine toward increasingly elaborate theoretical constructions. Master Henry consults his medical texts, looking for precedents that might guide treatment decisions. He finds references to similar cases in Arabic medical literature, along with detailed discussions of the astrological factors that influence disease development and the optimal timing for various therapeutic interventions. The merchant's treatment plan incorporates elements that reflect medieval medicine's integration of natural philosophy, astrology, and spiritual healing. The bloodletting will be performed during specific lunar phases that supposedly enhance the procedure's effectiveness. His herbal remedies will include substances chosen not only for their humoral properties, but also for their correspondence with planetary influences that affect his constitutional type. His diet will be adjusted to account for seasonal variations that alter the relative strength of different humors. The hospital's most challenging cases often involve patients whose conditions seem to resist all forms of intervention. The elderly woman in the corner bed has been receiving treatments for nearly a month without showing significant improvement. Her persistent fever, progressive weakness, and failure to respond to standard remedies have led Master Henry to conclude that her condition involves supernatural as well as natural factors. Medieval medical theory acknowledges that some diseases result from divine judgment, demonic influence, or other spiritual causes that transcend purely natural explanations. While physicians are expected to apply their medical knowledge to such cases, they also recognize the limitations of earthly treatments when dealing with disorders that originate in the supernatural realm. The woman's treatment accordingly includes both medical and spiritual elements. She continues to receive bloodletting and herbal remedies designed to address her humoral imbalances. But these natural treatments are supplemented by blessed water, prayers for healing, and consultation with the hospital's chaplains about possible spiritual causes for her condition. This integration of medical and spiritual healing reflects medieval Christianity's holistic understanding of human nature. The body and soul are intimately connected, making physical disease potentially symptomatic of spiritual disorders that require religious as well as medical intervention. A patient's failure to respond to purely natural treatments might indicate the need for confession, penance, or other spiritual remedies that address the moral dimensions of illness. As Master Henry completes his evening rounds, the full complexity of medieval medical practice becomes apparent. The theoretical framework underlying diagnosis and treatment represents centuries of scholarly development, incorporating insights from Greek, Arabic, and contemporary European sources into comprehensive systems that attempt to explain disease in terms of natural philosophy, moral theology, and empirical observation. Yet the practical results of this elaborate theoretical apparatus remain frustratingly mixed. Some patients clearly benefit from the hospital's treatments, recovering completely or showing significant improvement. Others decline despite receiving identical care, while still others seem to recover spontaneously regardless of intervention. Medieval medicine's greatest limitation isn't lack of intellectual sophistication or absence of genuine concern for patients. Welfare both qualities are abundantly evident in practitioners like Master Henry. The fundamental problem is methodological, the absence of systematic approaches for testing theoretical predictions against observed outcomes, and the tendency to explain treatment's failures as confirming rather than challenging established. Medical doctrine, the question that emerges from observing medieval medical practice at its most advanced level isn't whether individual treatments occasionally help, they sometimes do. The question is whether the elaborate theoretical systems that govern medical practice represent genuine knowledge about disease or sophisticated forms of rationalization that allow practitioners to maintain confidence in approaches that may be fundamentally misguided. As night settles over the hospital and patients attempt to rest despite their various ailments, the medieval medical establishment continues its elaborate dance between theory and practice, confident in its methods, even when those methods fail to produce the healing they promise. Whether this represents the best available healthcare in a world of limited knowledge, or a cautionary tale about the dangers of intellectual systems that become disconnected from empirical reality, depends largely on your perspective as either patient or practitioner in this ancient theater of suffering and hope. The morning arrives with its familiar chorus of coughs, groans, and whispered prayers. But today, you notice something that hadn't been apparent during your first weeks in the hospital. The systematic way that illness spreads through the institution like water seeping through cracked stone. Your new bedmate, a baker's apprentice who arrived yesterday with a simple, broken arm, has already developed the telltale signs of hospital fever, the mysterious condition that seems to afflict healthy people only after they've spent several days in close proximity to the sick. The Hotel Diaz architecture, designed to promote spiritual healing through proximity to sacred spaces, inadvertently creates perfect conditions for disease transmission. The long, narrow ward where you sleep houses over 100 patients in a space originally intended for perhaps 30. High windows that seem generous in winter become furnaces in summer, creating the kind of warm, humid environment where contagion flourishes. Like bread mold in a baker's pantry, your shared bed arrangement with the apprentice illustrates the hospital's fundamental misunderstanding of disease transmission. Medieval medical theory recognizes that some illnesses can pass from person to person, but attributes contagion to corrupted air rather than understanding the role of direct contact, contaminated surfaces, or respiratory droplets. The practice of bed sharing that doubles the hospital's capacity also doubles patients' exposure to whatever ailments their bedmates might be harboring. Brother Francois, making his morning rounds, demonstrates the hospital's approach to hygiene, with procedures that seem designed more for spiritual purification than practical disease prevention. He sprinkles holy water on patients and bedding, changes soiled linens when they become obviously contaminated, and maintains what medieval standards consider acceptable cleanliness. Yet his routine involves moving from bed to bed without washing his hands, using the same cloths and implements on multiple patients, and recycling bedding that receives only rudimentary cleaning between occupants. The hospital's sanitation systems reflect medieval engineering capabilities rather than understanding of disease transmission mechanisms. The communal latrines empty into channels that carry waste away from the building, representing sophisticated hydraulic planning that keeps sewage from accumulating inside the hospital itself. But the latrines serve over 500 people with limited cleaning, creating conditions that would challenge even robust constitutions. The morning meal provides another opportunity to observe how institutional practices facilitate contagion. Patients who can walk gather in the common refectory, sharing wooden bowls and spoons that receive basic washing between meals. Those confined to bed eat from shared containers, with healthy patients often assisting their sicker bedmates in ways that ensure intimate contact with whatever diseases they might be carrying. Your apprentice. Bedmate's deteriorating condition offers a case. Study in how previously healthy people acquire multiple ailments during hospital stays. His broken arm is healing adequately under the splints applied by Master Henry. But he's developed a persistent cough that sounds remarkably similar to those heard throughout the ward. His appetite has diminished, his sleep has become restless, and his skin has taken on the pallid appearance that characterizes long-term hospital residents. The hospital's approach to managing obviously contagious conditions reveals both recognition of disease, transmission, and limitations in preventing it. Patients with leprosy are housed in separate facilities, reflecting medieval understanding that this particular disease can spread through contact. But other conditions that we now know to be highly contagious, tuberculosis, dysentery, various fevers, are treated as individual disorders that don't pose risks to neighboring patients. The ward's ventilation system, designed primarily for temperature control, inadvertently contributes to respiratory disease transmission. The high windows and stone construction create air currents that circulate throughout the building, carrying whatever particles patients exhale during coughing, sneezing, or simply breathing. On calm days, the air becomes stagnant, concentrating airborne contaminants in the ward's enclosed spaces. Master Henry's medical rounds demonstrate how theoretical understanding of disease can actually hinder effective prevention. His diagnosis of various fevers as distinct humoral imbalances prevents recognition that many patients might be suffering from the same underlying condition transmitted through the hospital environment. Each case receives individualized treatment based on the patient's supposed constitutional characteristics, while the possibility of common causation goes unrecognized. The hospital's laundry facilities illustrate the challenges of maintaining hygiene in institutional settings. Soiled bedding and clothing are collected weekly for washing in large vats heated over wood fires. The process removes obvious dirt and odors, but lacks the high temperatures and chemical treatments that would actually eliminate disease-causing organisms. Cleaned laundry often retains contamination that becomes apparent only when supposedly fresh bedding continues to harbor the distinctive smell of previous occupants' ailments. The apprentice's broken arm provides a window into medieval understanding of wound care and infection prevention. Master Henry cleaned the injury with wine and applied a poultice made from herbs believed to prevent corruption. Techniques that demonstrate genuine concern for avoiding complications. The splinting technique itself is sophisticated, using wooden slats and linen bindings that immobilize the fracture while allowing for swelling and circulation. Yet the wound care protocols ignore factors that medieval practitioners don't recognize as relevant: the importance of keeping bandages dry and clean, the risks posed by handling multiple patients with the same hands and instruments, and the ways that hospital environments can introduce contamination into otherwise minor injuries. The apprentice's arm shows early signs of infectious redness, swelling, and discharge that Master Henry attributes to natural healing processes rather than recognizing as warning signs of serious complications. The hospital's food preparation areas reveal another vector for disease transmission that medieval hygiene practices don't adequately address. The kitchens serve hundreds of patients from common pots and serving vessels, with food preparation performed by staff who move between cooking duties and patient care without understanding the need for systematic hygiene protocols. The storage areas attract rodents whose presence is accepted as inevitable rather than recognized as a health hazard. The afternoon brings new patients whose conditions demonstrate how the hospital's reputation for healing can actually contribute to disease spread. Word has spread through Paris that the Hôtel Dieu provides effective treatment for various ailments, encouraging people with different diseases to seek care in the same facility. The result is a concentration of illness that creates opportunities for cross-infection between patients who, might never have encountered each other's diseases in their normal lives. A merchant with stomach complaints takes a bed near yours, complaining of symptoms that sound suspiciously similar to those experienced by several patients who were discharged last week. A young woman with a persistent rash is placed in the women's ward, where her condition will be exposed to dozens of other patients, whose various ailments create a complex microbial environment. An elderly man with breathing difficulties joins the collection of respiratory cases that occupy the hospital's eastern wing. The institutional memory of hospital staff includes awareness that certain seasonal patterns affect patient mortality and morbidity, though they interpret these patterns through humoral theory rather than recognizing disease transmission dynamics. Brother Francois mentions that summer months typically bring more fever cases, which he attributes to the heating effects of warm weather on patients. Humoral balance, rather than understanding that higher temperatures and humidity create favorable conditions for many infectious diseases. The hospital's approach to managing dead patients reveals another aspect of institutional hygiene that affects living residents' health. Bodies are prepared for burial in the same spaces used for patient care, handled by staff who then return to duties involving food preparation and medical treatment. The funeral rites conducted in the hospital chapel create opportunities for the entire community to gather in enclosed spaces, facilitating disease transmission during periods when mortality rates suggest that highly contagious conditions may be circulating as evening approaches. You realize that the hospital's design and operational procedures create what modern epidemiologists would recognize as ideal conditions for nosocomial infectious diseases that patients acquire specifically because they're receiving institutional care. The combination of overcrowding, inadequate hygiene, shared facilities, and concentration of sick people from diverse backgrounds creates a microbial mixing bowl where pathogens can circulate, mutate, and find new hosts with remarkable efficiency. Your apprentice bedmate's condition continues to deteriorate, though Master Henry remains confident that proper humoral treatment will eventually restore his health. The broken arm that brought him to the hospital represents a minor injury that should heal completely with adequate rest and basic care. But his acquisition of respiratory symptoms, digestive complaints, and general malaise during his hospital stay suggests that the institution designed to promote healing may actually be hastening his decline. The fundamental question raised by observing disease transmission within medieval hospitals isn't whether institutional care provides any benefits. It clearly offers advantages, including adequate nutrition, shelter, and spiritual support that many patients lack in their normal lives. The question is whether these benefits justify the increased disease risks that accompany residents in environments where contagion spreads with the efficiency of gossip and the persistence of stone. The second week of your apprentice bedmates hospital stay reveals the hospital's transformation into what you begin to recognize as a vast biological laboratory, where dozens of different diseases interact in ways that medieval medical theory cannot adequately explain. His broken arm has healed adequately under Master Henry's care, but he has now acquired symptoms that suggest he's contracted at least 3 different conditions during his residence in the supposedly healing environment. The ward's morning routine demonstrates how institutional practices designed to promote recovery actually facilitate the systematic exchange of pathogens among vulnerable populations. Brother Francois begins his rounds by examining patients' urine samples, using the same glass flask for multiple patients and rinsing it only perfunctorily between examinations. His examination technique involves smelling, swirling, and closely observing samples that contain whatever microorganisms each patient's condition has produced, then carrying those contaminants to the next bed in his systematic progression through the ward. The hospital's overcrowding has reached levels that strain even medieval tolerance for discomfort. The original design accommodated 300 beds, serving 600 patients through bed-sharing arrangements. But current occupancy exceeds even these doubled numbers. Straw mattresses fill the spaces between regular beds and some patients. Sleep on thin blankets spread directly on the stone floor. The result is a population density that ensures intimate contact between people suffering from diverse ailments. Your apprentice bedmate's respiratory symptoms have worsened overnight, developing into the kind of persistent, productive cough that characterizes several other patients in your immediate vicinity. The sound carries clearly through the ward's acoustically resonant stone construction. It's creating a symphony of coughs, sneezes, and labored breathing that suggests widespread respiratory disease among the hospital population. Master Henry's morning examination of the apprentice reveals his approach to what modern medicine would recognize as obvious nosocomial infection. The young man's broken arm continues to heal properly, but he has developed fever, loss of appetite, night sweats, and the characteristic cough that seems to affect many long-term hospital residents. Rather than recognizing these as symptoms of disease acquired within the hospital environment, Master Henry diagnoses a secondary humoral imbalance, triggered by the disruption to the apprentice's natural constitution caused by his original injury. The treatment protocol prescribed for the apprentice's new symptoms illustrates medieval medicine's inability to distinguish between different types of fever or recognize patterns that might suggest common causation. He receives bloodletting. To address the excess sanguine humor indicated by his fever, herbal remedies designed to cool his overheated constitution, and dietary modifications that reduce foods thought to inflame his condition. These treatments address his symptoms according to established humoral principles while ignoring the possibility that he's contracted a contagious disease from other patients. The hospital's approach to waste disposal creates additional opportunities for contamination that affect patient health in ways that medieval hygiene theory doesn't recognize. Chamber pots used by bedridden patients are emptied by staff who then handle food preparation and patient care without adequate cleaning of hands or implements. The communal latrines, while engineered to prevent waste accumulation, become reservoirs of contamination that affect anyone who uses them. The midday meal provides a case study in how institutional food service can become a vector for disease transmission. Patients with various ailments share serving utensils, eating implements, and drinking vessels that receive only basic washing between uses. The pottage served from common cauldrons offers opportunities for contamination from food handlers who move between patient care duties and kitchen responsibilities without recognizing the need for systematic hygiene protocols. A new arrival in the ward demonstrates how the hospital's reputation attracts patients whose conditions contribute to the institution's growing disease burden. The man, a cloth merchant from the city's mercantile district, arrived this morning with what appears to be the same respiratory condition that has affected several other patients in recent weeks. His placement in a bed adjacent to yours ensures that you and your apprentice bedmate will be exposed to whatever pathogens he's brought from the outside community. The merchant's condition illustrates the hospital's role as both treatment center and disease distribution hub. His symptoms suggest that he contracted his illness while traveling on business, bringing pathogens from distant communities into contact with the hospital's concentrated population. At the same time, his residence in the hospital will expose him to whatever diseases are currently circulating among existing patients, creating opportunities for him to acquire additional conditions that he might then carry back to his family and business associates when he's discharged. The hospital's staff rotation patterns contribute to disease transmission in ways that medieval institutional management doesn't recognize as problematic. Brothers and lay workers move between different wards, handling patients with diverse conditions and carrying contamination throughout the facility. The same attendants who care for patients with obvious respiratory disease also serve those recovering from injuries or suffering from digestive complaints, ensuring systematic mixing of whatever pathogens each condition produces. Brother Francois mentions during afternoon rounds that several patients discharged in recent weeks have returned with conditions similar to those they supposedly recovered from during their previous stays. He interprets this pattern as evidence that certain humoral imbalances predispose individuals to recurring illness. Rather than recognizing the possibility that inadequately treated, hospital-acquired infections might persist after discharge and then require readmission when symptoms worsen, the hospital's approach to managing patients who die during treatment reveals another vector for disease transmission that medieval hygiene practices don't adequately address. Bodies are prepared for burial in spaces adjacent to patient care areas, handled by staff who then return to duties involving living patients without understanding the contamination risks posed by contact with corpses. The funeral rites conducted in the hospital chapel create gathering opportunities that facilitate airborne disease transmission during periods of high mortality. Your apprentice bedmate's condition has now deteriorated to the point where his survival becomes questionable. The broken arm that originally brought him to the hospital represents a minor injury that should have healed completely with basic care and rest. Instead, his acquisition of respiratory disease, digestive complaints, and progressive weakness during his hospital stay suggests that institutional care has transformed a simple fracture case into a complex medical emergency. The ward's evening routine demonstrates how practices designed to promote rest and recovery actually create conditions that favor disease transmission. As natural light fades and oil lamps are lit, patients settle into shared beds and close sleeping quarters, where extended intimate contact ensures exchange of respiratory secretions, skin bacteria, and other biological materials. The hospital's heating system, designed to maintain comfortable temperatures during winter months, circulates air throughout the facility in ways that distribute airborne contaminants. The cloth merchant's rapid development of additional symptoms provides a real-time demonstration of how quickly supposedly healing environments can become sources of new health problems. Within hours of his arrival, he has begun displaying signs of digestive upset that mirror conditions affecting other patients in the ward. His respiratory symptoms, originally limited to a simple cough, have progressed to include fever and breathing difficulties that suggest more serious lung involvement. Master Henry's evening examination of multiple patients reveals the limitations of medieval diagnostic methods in recognizing disease patterns that might indicate common causation. Each patient receives individual assessment focused on their supposed humoral characteristics and constitutional tendencies, while the possibility that similar symptoms in multiple patients might indicate a single contagious condition circulating through the hospital environment remains outside the framework of medical consideration. The hospital's pharmaceutical practices contribute to cross-contamination in ways that medieval medical theory doesn't recognize as problematic. Herbal preparations are often shared between patients with supposedly similar conditions, while the implements used to prepare and administer medicines move between different patients without adequate cleaning. The blessed water used for spiritual purification ceremonies becomes a potential reservoir for waterborne pathogens when the same container serves multiple patients. As night settles over the ward and patients attempt to rest despite their various discomforts, you realize that the hospital has become a kind of disease incubator where pathogens circulate, evolve, and find new hosts with an efficiency that medieval medical understanding cannot explain or prevent. The institution's fundamental purpose, providing care for the sick and injured, has created an environment where healthy people routinely become sicker than when they arrived. The question that emerges from observing medieval hospitals as epidemiological environments isn't whether institutional care provides any genuine benefits. Clearly offers advantages, including nutrition, shelter, and professional attention that many patients lack in their normal circumstances. The question is whether these benefits justify the systematic disease transmission that appears to be an inevitable consequence of concentrating sick people in inadequately ventilated, overcrowded facilities where hygiene practices reflect spiritual, rather than medical priorities. Your apprentice bedmates labored breathing in the darkness. Beside you provides a sobering reminder that medieval hospitals, despite their charitable intentions and theoretical medical sophistication, may represent humanity's first systematic attempt to create environments where disease spreads more efficiently than it does in the natural world. By the third week of your apprentice bedmate's residence in the hospital, his condition has become a living demonstration of how institutions designed to heal the sick can systematically destroy the healthy. His broken arm, the original injury that brought him seeking care, has healed completely under Master Henry's competent treatment, but he has now acquired what appears to be a comprehensive collection of the diseases currently circulating through the hospital's overcrowded wards. The morning brings news that transforms your understanding of the hospital's role in the broader community's health. Brother Francois announces that 3 patients discharged last month have died at home from conditions that developed after they left the hospital, while several others have returned with symptoms identical to those experienced by current residents. The pattern suggests that the institution supposed to contain and treat disease has instead become a distribution center that spreads illness throughout. Paris. Master Henry's examination of your bedmate reveals the full extent of his deterioration. The respiratory condition that began as a simple cough has progressed to severe breathing difficulties. His digestive system has been compromised by persistent diarrhea, and his skin has developed lesions that resemble those affecting several other long-term patients. Most troubling, his original broken arm has begun showing signs of infection despite its apparent healing, suggesting that his overall health has been so compromised that his body can no longer maintain basic immune function. The hospital's response to this obvious pattern of institutional disease transmission demonstrates medieval medicine's theoretical limitations in recognizing and addressing nosocomial infections. Rather than acknowledging that the hospital environment might be creating health problems, Master Henry diagnoses your bedmate's multiple conditions as evidence of a complex constitutional disorder that predisposes him to various humoral imbalances. The treatments prescribed address each symptom according to established medical principles while ignoring the possibility of systematic institutional contamination. The ward's current population provides a cross-section of how medieval hospitals function as disease repositories where pathogens accumulate, interact, and evolve in ways that create new health challenges. The cloth merchant who arrived with respiratory symptoms has now developed digestive complaints identical to those affecting multiple other patients. A woman admitted for childbirth complications has acquired the characteristic cough that seems endemic among long-term residents. An elderly man receiving treatment for joint pain has developed fever and skin lesions that suggest exposure to conditions he couldn't have contracted in his normal community environment. The hospital's food service operations reveal another dimension of how institutional practices facilitate disease transmission. The kitchen staff, many of whom also serve as patient care attendants, move between food preparation duties and medical responsibilities without recognizing contamination risks. The communal meals served to ambulatory patients create opportunities for direct transmission through shared utensils, serving vessels, and close personal contact during eating. Brother Thomas, the hospital's herbalist, has begun to notice patterns in pharmaceutical demand that suggest something systematic is affecting patient health. His supplies of remedies for respiratory ailments have been depleted unusually quickly, while preparations for digestive disorders and skin conditions are being requested far more frequently than normal seasonal patterns would predict. Yet he interprets these trends as evidence of unusual atmospheric conditions affecting the city's humoral environment, rather than recognizing institutional disease transmission. The hospital's architectural features, originally designed to promote spiritual healing through proximity to sacred spaces, have inadvertently created optimal conditions for pathogen circulation. The high ceilings and stone construction that seemed beneficial for temperature control actually create air currents that distribute respiratory secretions throughout the facility. The open ward design that allows patients to participate in religious services also ensures that airborne diseases can reach every resident. Your apprentice bedmate's progressive decline provides a case study in how healthy individuals can be systematically destroyed by institutional care that ignores basic principles of disease prevention. His original injury represented a straightforward medical problem that should have responded well to simple treatment and rest. Instead, his extended residence in an environment saturated with diverse pathogens has exposed him to diseases that his previously robust constitution cannot resist. The hospital's approach to managing obviously sick patients reveals the absence of effective isolation procedures that might limit disease transmission. Patients with severe respiratory symptoms continue to share beds and common facilities with those recovering from unrelated injuries. Individuals with obvious digestive disorders participate in communal meals where their conditions can spread to previously healthy residents. The hospital's charitable mission of accepting anyone who needs care conflicts with practical disease control measures that might protect existing patients from additional contamination. Master Henry's afternoon rounds demonstrate how medical theory can actually impede recognition of institutional health problems. His systematic examination of individual patients focuses on their supposed humoral characteristics and constitutional predispositions while missing the obvious patterns that suggest common environmental causes for widespread illness. Each case receives personalized diagnosis and treatment that ignores the epidemiological reality of systematic disease transmission within the hospital community. The hospital's record-keeping practices reflect the medieval medical establishment's priorities and blind spots. Detailed financial records track every donation, expenditure, and property transaction with scholarly precision. But medical records information about disease patterns, treatment outcomes, or mortality rates exist only in the memory of individual practitioners who may not recognize systematic problems, even when they observe them directly. A new development in your bedmate's condition illustrates the hospital's role in creating drug-resistant strains of disease that pose challenges beyond medieval medicine's capabilities. His persistent diarrhea has failed to respond to the herbal remedies that normally provide relief for digestive disorders, while his respiratory symptoms have worsened despite treatments that usually help patients with similar conditions. The concentration of sick people receiving similar treatments may have created selection pressure that favors pathogens resistant to conventional medieval remedies. The cloth merchant's condition has now progressed to include symptoms that mirror your bedmate's deterioration, breathing difficulties, digestive complaints, skin lesions, and general weakness that suggests multiple organ system involvement. His rapid acquisition of conditions affecting other ward residents demonstrates how quickly the hospital environment can overwhelm previously healthy individuals with an array of diseases they might never have encountered in their normal lives. Evening rounds bring news that several hospital staff members have developed symptoms similar to those affecting long-term patients. Brother Francois has begun displaying the characteristic cough that seems endemic among ward residents, while one of the lay sisters responsible for food service has developed digestive problems identical to those experienced by multiple patients. The pattern suggests that the hospital's disease burden has reached levels that threaten even the supposedly healthy individuals responsible for patient care. The hospital's approach to spiritual care, designed to provide comfort and meaning during illness, inadvertently contributes to disease transmission through practices that concentrate patients in enclosed spaces. Daily religious services bring together individuals with diverse conditions in the chapel's confined quarters, while confession procedures create intimate contact between sick patients and clergy who then move throughout the facility. Master Henry's evening examination of your bedmate confirms what has become obvious to casual observation. His condition has deteriorated beyond the hospital's ability to provide effective treatment. The multiple diseases he has acquired during his stay have created a complex medical emergency that medieval therapeutic approaches cannot address. His broken arm, the original problem that brought him seeking care, represents a minor success overshadowed by the systematic destruction of his overall health. As night falls and the ward settles into its familiar pattern of shared discomfort, you realize that medieval hospitals represent humanity's first systematic attempt to concentrate disease in institutional settings, where traditional community immune defenses cannot operate effectively. The charitable intentions and theoretical medical sophistication that justify these institutions cannot disguise their function as incubators where pathogens circulate, evolve, and find new hosts with lethal efficiency. The apprentice beside you, whose labored breathing now dominates the soundscape of your shared sleeping space, embodies the tragic irony of medieval healthcare. Institutions created to heal the sick have instead perfected the art of making healthy people die from diseases they would never have encountered if they had remained in their normal communities. His broken arm will heal completely, but his exposure to the hospital's concentrated disease environment has likely ensured that he will not survive too. Appreciate the successful treatment of his original injury. The question that haunts your final hours of shared residence isn't whether medieval hospitals provide any benefits. They clearly offer advantages including nutrition, shelter, and professional care that many patients desperately need. The question is whether these institutions represent genuine progress in human healthcare or cautionary examples of how good intentions combined with inadequate understanding can create systematic health disasters that affect entire communities. Long after individual patients have been discharged or buried, dawn breaks over the hospital with an unusual stillness that you've learned to associate with mortality. During the night, your apprentice bedmate finally succumbed to the collection of diseases he acquired during his residence in this supposedly healing institution. Brother Francois discovered his death during the pre-dawn rounds, his body already growing cold in the shared bed that will house another patient before the morning meal is served. The efficiency with which the hospital processes death reveals an institutional expertise. Born of extensive practice, the preparation of your bedmate's body unfolds with ceremonial precision that transforms individual tragedy into routine institutional procedure. Brother Francois begins by closing the dead man's eyes and arranging his hands in prayer position, traditional gestures that prepare the corpse for the religious ceremonies that accompany death in medieval hospitals. The apprentice's face, which had shown such suffering during his final weeks, now displays the peaceful expression that medieval Christians interpret as evidence of successful spiritual preparation for the afterlife. The hospital's approach to managing death reflects both practical necessity and theological conviction about the relationship between earthly suffering and eternal salvation. Brother Francois explains that the apprentice's prolonged illness, despite its apparent medical failure, actually represents spiritual success. His suffering provided opportunities for confession, prayer, and moral purification that prepared his soul for divine judgment. The diseases that destroyed his body also burned away the sins that might otherwise have condemned him to prolonged punishment in purgatory. The ward's morning routine continues around the apprentice's corpse with the matter-of-fact efficiency that characterizes institutional life in close proximity to mortality. Other patients consume their breakfast porridge while the body is prepared for removal, and new arrivals are processed through the admission ceremony that will assign one of them to your now vacant half of the bed. The democracy of death in medieval hospitals operates without sentiment or extended grieving. Individual mortality is simply another element in the daily routine that keeps the institution functioning. Master Henry's examination of the apprentices. Body provides insight into medieval medicine's approach to understanding treatment failure and patient mortality. Rather than recognizing the obvious pattern of nosocomial infection that killed a previously healthy young man, he attributes death to the patient's constitutional inability to maintain proper humoral balance under the stress of institutional care. The multiple diseases that the apprentice acquired during his hospital stay are interpreted as evidence of his fundamental weakness rather than as indicators of systematic institutional problems. The hospital's mortality statistics, while never formally compiled, would reveal patterns that medieval medical theory cannot adequately explain. Patients admitted with minor injuries or simple conditions often develop complex medical problems during extended stays, while those who arrive in critical conditions sometimes recover completely with minimal intervention. The institution's therapeutic effectiveness seems inversely related to length of residence, suggesting that hospital care itself may be a significant health risk. Your new bedmate, assigned to the apprentice's spot before his body has been removed for burial, is a middle-aged carpenter who arrived this morning with a hand injury sustained while working on construction projects for one of Paris's expanding churches. His condition represents exactly the kind of straightforward case that medieval hospitals handle most successfully: a clean wound that requires basic care, rest, and time to heal naturally. Yet his placement in the bed where your previous bedmate died from hospital-acquired diseases illustrates the institution's inability to learn from obvious patterns of treatment failure. The carpenter's admission ceremony demonstrates the hospital's spiritual approach to healthcare that prioritizes religious preparation over medical diagnosis. His feet are washed, his clothes are replaced with institutional garments, and he receives confession from one of the hospital's chaplains before any medical examination of his injured hand. The process reflects medieval Christianity's understanding that physical healing depends ultimately on spiritual health, making religious preparation an essential component of effective treatment. Brother Francois' explanation of the hospital's daily routine to your new bedmate reveals institutional assumptions about the relationship between suffering and salvation that justify extended residence even when medical treatment proves ineffective. Patients are encouraged to view their illness as divinely ordained opportunities for spiritual growth, while extended hospital stays provide time for prayer, contemplation, and moral improvement that might not occur in their normal lives. The hospital's approach to managing families of deceased patients demonstrates both compassionate concern and practical efficiency in handling the administrative details that accompany institutional death. The apprentice's father, a leather worker from the same guild that employed his son, arrives at midday to collect the body and settle any outstanding financial obligations. His grief at losing a healthy young man to diseases acquired during hospital treatment is overshadowed by gratitude that his son died in a place where proper religious preparation ensured the salvation of his soul. Master Henry's consultation with the apprentice's father illustrates medieval medicine's theoretical framework for explaining treatment failure in ways that maintain confidence in established medical practices. The young man's death resulted from constitutional weaknesses that predisposed him to complex humoral imbalances, compounded by environmental factors and possibly divine judgment for sins that required earthly suffering as penance. The medical treatments he received were appropriate and would have succeeded in a patient with stronger natural constitution. The hospital cemetery, visible through the ward's windows, contains physical evidence of the institution's mixed success in treating patients who arrive seeking healing. Recent graves outnumber empty beds, suggesting that mortality rates exceed cure rates by significant margins. Yet the medieval understanding of hospital success focuses more on spiritual outcomes than medical statistics, making high death rates compatible with institutional effectiveness as measured by appropriate religious preparation for the afterlife. Your Carpenter Bedmate's injury provides a case study in how medieval hospitals handle conditions that fall within their limited therapeutic capabilities. His hand wound requires cleaning, bandaging, and immobilization procedures that medieval medicine performs competently using techniques developed through centuries of practical experience. The injury itself is unlikely to pose life-threatening complications if properly cared for, making his prognosis relatively favorable compared to patients with more complex conditions. Yet his placement in an environment where multiple diseases circulate systematically exposes him to health risks that far exceed those posed by his original injury. Within hours of his arrival, he has been exposed to whatever pathogens killed your previous bedmate, along with diseases affecting dozens of other patients in the overcrowded ward. His healthy constitution may protect him initially, but extended residence in the hospital's contaminated environment poses cumulative risks that increase with every passing day. The afternoon brings news that several recently discharged patients have died at home from conditions that developed during their hospital stays, while others have returned with complications that require readmission. The pattern suggests that the hospital's role in the community's health extends far beyond its walls, as patients carry institutional diseases back to their families and neighborhoods when they are released. Master Henry's response to these reports demonstrates medieval medicine's inability to recognize institutional health problems that fall outside established theoretical frameworks. He attributes the pattern of post-discharge mortality to the challenging nature of cases that require hospital treatment, rather than acknowledging that institutional care might actually create health problems that persist after patients leave. The facility, the hospital's economic model, reveals another dimension of institutional priorities that affect patient care and mortality rates. The facility depends on donations from wealthy benefactors who contribute money and goods to support charitable care for the poor. This financial structure creates incentives to maintain high occupancy rates and demonstrate the institution's charitable impact, potentially conflicting with medical practices that might prioritize patient welfare over institutional financial needs. Your Carpenter Bedmate's first day in the hospital demonstrates how quickly institutional life can overwhelm individual medical problems. His hand injury, which should be the focus of treatment, becomes secondary to navigating the complex social environment of shared beds, communal meals, and religious obligations that structure daily life. The injury that brought him to the hospital may heal successfully, but his exposure to the institution's broader disease environment poses risks that medieval medical theory cannot recognize or address. Evening rounds bring the familiar ritual of administering last rites to patients whose conditions have deteriorated beyond medical intervention. Tonight, the ceremony involves an elderly woman whose persistent fever has resisted weeks of treatment, and a young man whose digestive problems have progressed to the point where he can no longer retain food or water. The spiritual preparation for death receives more systematic attention than the medical attempts to preserve life, reflecting institutional priorities that value eternal salvation above temporary physical survival. As darkness settles over the ward and patients attempt to rest despite their various discomforts, the hospital's fundamental purpose becomes clear. It serves less as a medical institution designed to cure disease than as a spiritual processing center that prepares the sick and dying for whatever fate divine providence has ordained. The high mortality rates that might seem to indicate institutional failure actually demonstrate success in providing appropriate ecclesia's preparation for the transition from earthly life to eternal judgment. Your Carpenter Bedmate's first night in the hospital occurs in a bed still warm from its previous occupant's death, surrounded by the sounds of patients whose conditions range from treatable to terminal. His injured hand may heal completely under medieval medical care, but his residence in an institution where death occurs with systematic regularity exposes him to risks that no amount of spiritual preparation can adequately address. The question that emerges from witnessing medieval hospitals as environments where death occurs more frequently than healing isn't whether these institutions serve important social functions. They clearly provide care, comfort, and religious consolation for people who lack other resources. The question is whether their role as houses of the dying represents unavoidable limitation, given medieval medical capabilities, or tragic misallocation of resources that creates systematic health disasters while claiming to provide healing. The second day of your carpenter bedmate's residence in the hospital reveals how institutional death has been systematized into administrative procedures that prioritize record-keeping and property management over individual grief or medical learning. Brother Francois arrives at morning prayers, carrying a leather-bound ledger where he records basic information about each patient who dies in the hospital: name, origin, date of admission, and disposition of any property they brought with them. The apprentice who died yesterday merits 3 lines in the ledger, noting that his father collected the body and settled the modest debt incurred during his stay. The hospital's approach to managing deceased patients' belongings illustrates the complex intersection of charity, property law, and practical necessity that governs medieval institutional life. Patients who die without family to claim their possessions contribute their few worldly goods to the hospital's endowment, providing a small but steady stream of income that helps support charitable operations. The apprentice's leather tools, clothing, and the few coins in his purse were inventoried and transferred to the hospital's treasury, where they will be sold to fund care for future patients. Master Henry's morning rounds demonstrate how medieval medicine's theoretical framework prevents systematic analysis of institutional mortality patterns that might inform improved treatment approaches. Each patient's death receives individual interpretation based on humoral theory and constitutional analysis, while the obvious pattern of healthy people dying from diseases acquired during hospital residence remains outside the scope of medical consideration. Your carpenter bedmate's injured hand provides a case study in medieval wound care techniques that represent genuine medical competence within limited theoretical understanding. Master Henry cleans the injury with wine, applies a poultice made from herbs believed to prevent corruption, and demobilizes the hand with wooden splints and linen bindings. The technique demonstrates practical skill developed through centuries of treating similar injuries. Though the theoretical explanations for why these treatments work rely on humoral principles that may or may not correspond to physiological reality, the morning's new admissions include a pregnant woman whose labor has become complicated, an elderly merchant with breathing difficulties, and a young priest suffering from what appears to be the characteristic hospital fever that affects many institutional residents. Their placement in the ward ensures exposure to whatever diseases are currently circulating among existing patients, creating opportunities for cross-infection that medieval hygiene practices do not adequately prevent. The hospital's approach to managing women in childbirth reveals both the institution's charitable mission and its limitations in handling conditions that require specialized knowledge and sterile procedures. The woman in labor receives care from lay sisters who have practical experience assisting births, but their techniques rely more on traditional folk wisdom than on systematic medical knowledge. The shared facilities and overcrowded conditions create additional risks for both mother and infant that might not exist in normal home birth situations. Brother Francois' administrative duties extend beyond patient care to include managing the complex financial relationships that support hospital operations. Wealthy benefactors often establish endowments that fund specific beds or services, while merchants and craftsmen may purchase lifetime care contracts that guarantee treatment if they become ill. The carpenter beside you mentions that his guild maintains a fund that will cover his hospital expenses, reflecting the medieval development of mutual aid societies that provide healthcare benefits for their members. The hospital's pharmaceutical practices reveal another dimension of institutional priorities that affect patient mortality rates. Expensive imported remedies like ground pearls or powdered unicorn horn are reserved for wealthy patients whose families can afford premium treatments, while the poor receive care based on locally grown herbs and basic procedures. This tiered approach to medical treatment reflects broader social hierarchies, while potentially affecting survival rates for different classes of patients. Master Henry's afternoon examination of multiple patients demonstrates how medieval diagnostic techniques can create false confidence about treatment effectiveness. His systematic evaluation of urine samples, pulse characteristics, and humoral indicators produces detailed diagnoses that guide therapeutic decisions. But the absence of systematic outcome tracking means that treatment failures are never analyzed. To improve future practice, the pregnant woman's condition has deteriorated throughout the day, developing complications that suggest the need for interventions beyond the hospital's capabilities. The lay sisters attending her birth have extensive practical experience, but medieval understanding of anatomy and physiology limits their ability to address serious obstetric problems. Her placement in the general ward rather than specialized birthing facilities creates additional fracture risks from exposure to diseases affecting other patients. Your carpenter bedmate's hand injury continues to heal appropriately under Master Henry's care, but he has begun developing symptoms that suggest exposure to respiratory disease circulating through the ward. His appetite has decreased, his sleep has become restless, and he occasionally coughs in ways that mirror sounds made by several other patients. The pattern suggests that his residence in the hospital environment poses greater health risks than his original injury. The hospital's evening meal demonstrates how institutional food service can become a vector for disease transmission, while also providing essential nutrition for patients who might otherwise lack adequate diet. The communal dining arrangements for ambulatory patients create opportunities for close contact between individuals with different conditions, while the shared serving utensils and eating implements facilitate pathogen exchange. The elderly merchant, admitted this morning, has developed additional symptoms that suggest rapid progression of his respiratory condition, possibly accelerated by exposure to other patients' diseases. His breathing difficulties have worsened, his fever has increased, and he shows signs of the general weakness that characterizes many long-term hospital residents. Master Henry's examination attributes these changes to natural disease progression, rather than recognizing institutional factors that might be accelerating his decline. Evening rounds bring the familiar ritual of last rites administration, tonight involving both the pregnant woman, whose labor complications have progressed beyond medical intervention, and the elderly merchant whose breathing difficulties suggest approaching respiratory failure. The spiritual preparation for death receives systematic attention from hospital chaplains. While the medical attempts to preserve life rely on treatments that may have little physiological effect, the hospital's approach to managing multiple simultaneous deaths reveals institutional procedures designed to maintain operations despite high mortality rates. Bodies are prepared for burial using standardized techniques that ensure appropriate religious observances while managing the practical logistics of corpse disposal. The hospital maintains its own cemetery for patients who die without family to claim their bodies, while those with relatives are released for burial according to their social station and religious tradition. Brother Francois' evening administrative duties include updating the hospital's mortality records and preparing reports for the religious authorities who oversee institutional operations. These documents track the number of deaths, the disposal of patients' property, and the financial impact of mortality on hospital resources. But they do not analyze medical factors that might explain why some patients recover while others decline. Despite receiving similar treatments, the pregnant woman dies during the night after prolonged labor that resulted in the death of both mother and infant. Her case illustrates the hospital's limitations in handling conditions that require specialized knowledge and sterile procedures, as well as the additional risks created by placing birthing women in general wards where they are exposed to diseases. affecting other patients. Your carpenter bedmate's first night in the hospital occurs in an environment where death has become routine administrative procedure rather than individual tragedy. His injured hand may heal successfully, but his exposure to institutional diseases and the hospital's broader mortality patterns suggests that his admission for a minor injury may have exposed him to risks that far exceed those posed by his original condition. The morning brings news that the elderly merchant also died during the night, succumbing to respiratory failure after less than 24 hours in the hospital. His rapid decline suggests either that his condition was more serious than initially apparent, or that institutional factors accelerated his deterioration in ways that medieval medical theory cannot explain. As Brother Francois updates his mortality ledger with 2 new entries, the hospital's fundamental nature becomes clear. It functions primarily as an institution that manages death rather than one that prevents it. The high mortality rates that might indicate medical failure are instead interpreted as evidence of the institution's success in providing appropriate spiritual preparation for the Kuntuski afterlife. The question that emerges from observing the hospital's systematic approach to managing patient mortality isn't whether the institution serves important social functions. It clearly provides care and comfort for people facing death without family support. The question is whether the hospital's role as a bureaucracy of mortality represents the best possible use of medieval society's resources for addressing human suffering, or whether alternative approaches might achieve better outcomes with fewer systematic health risks. The 3rd day of your carpenter bedmate's hospital stay brings a grim milestone. He has now resided in the institution long enough to observe a complete cycle of death and replacement in the surrounding beds. The pregnant woman and elderly merchant who died during the night have been succeeded by new patients whose conditions range from minor injuries to advanced disease, creating another generation of cases that will test the hospital's limited therapeutic capabilities. Your bedmate's hand injury has healed remarkably well under Master Henry's competent care, with the wound closing cleanly and function returning to his fingers. Medieval medicine's approach to basic wound treatment represents one of the few areas where institutional care provides clear benefits over what patients might receive in their normal communities. The techniques for cleaning injuries, preventing infection, and supporting natural healing processes reflect centuries of accumulated practical wisdom that genuinely improves patient outcomes. Yet the carpenter has also begun displaying early signs of the respiratory condition that seems endemic among hospital residents. His cough, initially occasional and mild, has become more persistent and productive. His appetite has diminished, his energy levels have decreased, and his sleep has become restless in ways that mirror the patterns observed in your previous bedmate during his fatal decline. Master Henry's examination of the carpenter demonstrates how medieval diagnostic techniques can miss obvious patterns while focusing on individual humoral characteristics. The physician notes the successful healing of the hand injury and attributes the developing respiratory symptoms to constitutional weakness revealed by the stress of institutional residence, rather than recognizing clear evidence of nosocomial disease transmission. The morning brings to new deaths among patients who had resided in the hospital for extended periods. An elderly woman whose fever resisted weeks of treatment finally succumbed during the early hours, while a middle-aged merchant who had been recovering from digestive complaints developed sudden breathing difficulties that proved fatal. There, deaths illustrate the hospital's pattern of initial improvement, followed by gradual decline as institutional diseases overwhelm patients. Natural defenses. The hospital's approach to replacing deceased patients reveals the institutional pressures that maintain high occupancy rates despite obvious mortality patterns. New admissions are processed through the same ceremony of spiritual cleansing and bed assignment that you witnessed upon your own arrival. With little consideration given to whether placement in recently vacated beds might expose healthy individuals to concentrated pathogen loads. Brother Francois Morning administrative duties include updating the mortality records that track institutional statistics without canalizing them for patterns that might inform improved medical practice. His ledger now contains dozens of entries documenting patients who died from conditions that developed or worsened during hospital residence. But these data are never compiled in ways that might reveal systematic problems with institutional care. The hospital cemetery has expanded visibly since your arrival, with new graves outnumbering the beds that have been vacated through patient discharge. The physical evidence of institutional mortality rates would be obvious to any systematic observer, but medieval approaches to healthcare evaluation focus on individual cases rather than population-level outcomes that might challenge established medical practices. Your carpenter bedmate's condition provides a real-time demonstration of how hospital residents can transform minor medical problems into life-threatening situations. His hand injury, which should have required only basic treatment and short-term rest, has been successfully addressed by medieval medical techniques. But his exposure to the institution's disease environment has initiated the same pattern of declining health that characterized your previous bedmate's fatal hospital course. Master Henry's afternoon rounds reveal the limitations of medieval medical education in preparing physicians to recognize institutional health problems. His training at the University of Paris provided extensive knowledge of classical texts and humoral theory, but included no systematic instruction in disease prevention, infection control, or population health analysis that might have enabled him to understand the hospital's role in creating rather than solving medical problems. The hospital's approach to managing obviously contagious conditions demonstrates both awareness of disease transmission and inability to implement effective teams prevention measures. Patients with leprosy are housed in separate facilities, reflecting recognition that this condition can spread through contact. But other diseases that we now know to be highly transmissible, tuberculosis, influenza, dysentery, are treated as individual disorders that pose no systematic risks to institutional populations. The afternoon's new admissions include a young woman with pregnancy complications, an elderly craftsman with joint problems, and a merchant's son suffering from digestive disorders. Their placement in the ward ensures immediate exposure to whatever pathogens are currently circulating among existing patients, while their own conditions contribute new elements to the institution's biological environment. Brother Thomas, the hospital's herbalist, has begun to notice unusual patterns in pharmaceutical demand that suggest systematic problems with patient health. His supplies of respiratory remedies have been depleted at unprecedented rates, while preparations for digestive disorders and general weakness are being requested far more frequently than historical patterns would predict. Yet he interprets these trends through the lens of humoral theory rather than recognizing evidence of institutional disease transmission. The hospital's evening meal provides another opportunity to observe how institutional practices facilitate pathogen exchange while also delivering essential nutrition. Your carpenter bedmate participates in the communal dining despite his developing respiratory symptoms, sharing utensils and close contact with other patients whose various conditions create opportunities for cross-infection. Master Henry's evening examination of multiple patients reveals the gap between medieval medical theory and institutional reality. His systematic evaluation of individual cases follows established diagnostic protocols and produces treatment recommendations based on centuries of medical scholarship. But his framework cannot accommodate the obvious pattern of healthy people becoming systematically sicker during hospital residence. The night brings another round of last rites administration, this time involving 3 patients whose conditions have deteriorated beyond medical intervention. The spiritual preparation for death has become so routine that it functions like any other institutional procedure, with standardized prayers, ceremonial elements, and administrative follow-up that transforms individual tragedy into organizational routine. Your carpenter bedmate's sleep has become increasingly disturbed by respiratory symptoms that now include night sweats, productive coughing, and breathing difficulties that suggest progression toward serious lung disease. His hand injury, the condition that brought him to the hospital, has healed completely and no longer requires medical attention. But his residence in the institutional environment has exposed him to diseases that pose far greater threats to his survival than his original wound. The morning of your bedmate's fourth day brings news that fundamentally changes your understanding of medieval hospitals and their role in community health. A messenger from the city authorities arrives to investigate reports that an unusual number of people who received treatment at the Hotel DA have died at home from similar conditions, while others have infected family members with diseases that seem to have originated in the hospital environment. The investigation reveals that the hospital, despite its charitable mission and theoretical medical sophistication, has become a disease distribution center that poses systematic health risks to Paris's broader population. Patients who survive their hospital stays often carry institutional pathogens back to their homes and workplaces, creating secondary infection clusters that affect people who never directly received institutional care. Master Henry's response to these revelations demonstrates how deeply invested medieval medical practitioners have become in theoretical systems that prevent recognition of obvious problems. He maintains that hospital deaths result from patients' constitutional weaknesses rather than institutional factors, while post-discharge mortality reflects the challenging nature of cases that require extended medical intervention. Your carpenter bedmate's condition has now progressed to the point where his survival has become questionable. Despite the successful treatment of his original hand injury, his transformation from healthy craftsman to seriously ill patient during 4 days of hospital residence provides clear evidence of the institution's role in creating rather than solving medical problems, as you prepare to witness another death in the bed beside you. The fundamental nature of medieval hospitals becomes inescapably clear. They function primarily as houses of the dying rather than institutions of healing. Their high mortality rates don't represent unavoidable limitations of medieval medical knowledge. They reflect systematic institutional practices that expose vulnerable populations to concentrated disease loads while claiming to provide therapeutic care. The question that emerges from observing medieval hospitals as mortality factories isn't whether these institutions serve any positive social functions. They clearly provide comfort, dignity, and spiritual preparation for people facing death without family support. The question is whether their role as systematic destroyers of human health represents the best possible application of medieval society's charitable resources, or whether alternative approaches might achieve the same spiritual benefits without creating epidemiological disasters that affect entire communities. Your carpenter bedmate's labored breathing in the pre-dawn darkness provides a final answer to that question. His successful hand surgery, performed with genuine medical competence, will be meaningless if he dies from diseases he acquired while seeking treatment for a minor injury. The medieval hospital's promise of healing has been revealed as a systematic process of institutional death, wrapped in religious ceremony and justified by theoretical medicine that cannot acknowledge its own fundamental failures. In the end, the medieval hospital represents humanity's first systematic attempt to organize healthcare as an institutional service, driven by genuine charitable intentions and supported by the most sophisticated medical knowledge available to its era. Yet the results speak for themselves. These houses of healing became houses of dying, where the sick went to expire in marginally more comfortable circumstances than they might have managed alone. The tragedy isn't that medieval medicine lacked modern knowledge about germs, antibiotics, or surgical technique. The tragedy is that institutions designed to embody humanity's highest ideals of compassion and care became systematic destroyers of human health, creating epidemiological disasters while maintaining absolute confidence in their beneficial mission. Perhaps that's the most sobering lesson from these medieval halls of suffering. Good intentions, theological certainty, and theoretical sophistication provide no protection against systematic institutional failure. The question isn't whether you'd survive a stay in a medieval hospital. It's whether you'd recognize the signs of institutional dysfunction before it was too late to escape. Sweet dreams.